Some rules are made to protect us, not to control us. But when curiosity wins, the consequences can be horrifying. This is a story about a family who broke the one rule they were warned about and paid the price. Turn off the lights and listen closely, because this could happen to anyone. When the Thompsons moved into the old farmhouse, they thought they'd found the perfect escape from city life. Surrounded by acres of woods and far from prying neighbors, it was everything they had dreamed of. The realtor only mentioned one odd thing during the tour. Whatever you do, don't look out the windows after midnight. It's just an old superstition. The Thompsons laughed it off. They weren't superstitious, and besides, the house had charm. A big kitchen, spacious rooms, and a wraparound porch perfect for summer night. For the first few weeks, life was peaceful. But then the noises started. At first, it was faint, a soft tapping on the windows late at night. Laura, the mother, brushed it off as tree branches swaying in the wind. Her husband, Mark, agreed. But their daughter, Lily, wasn't convinced. "There's no tree outside my window," she whispered one morning, her wide eyes filled with fear. Mark checked, and she was right. There wasn't a single branch near her second-floor room. That night, the tapping grew louder. It moved from one window to the next, like someone, or something, was circling the house. Lily begged to sleep in her parents' room, and Laura agreed, though Mark insisted it was just animals. Then, on the fourth night, curiosity got the better of him. At 12:03 a.m., Mark crept to the living room window. The tapping had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. Slowly, he peeled back the curtain. What he saw made his blood run cold. A figure stood on the lawn, completely still. It was tall and impossibly thin, its limbs too long for its body. Its face was pale and featureless, except for two hollow eyes that seemed to stare directly at him. Mark stumbled back, his heart pounding. When he dared to look again, the figure was gone. The next morning, Mark told Laura they needed to leave, but she dismissed his fear as stress. "We're not going to run because of a shadow," she said. But that night, the tapping turned to scratching. Lily screamed from her room. Laura and Mark raced upstairs to find her staring at the window, her face pale. I looked," she stammered, tears streaming down her face. "It saw me." The scratching stopped abruptly, replaced by a deep, resonant knock. It came from the front door. Mark grabbed a baseball bat, determined to protect his family. He flung the door open, but no one was there. Behind him, Lily shrieked. Mark spun around and saw it. The same figure, now inside the house, standing at the base of the stairs. Its head tilted unnaturally as if observing them. It whispered, "You broke the rule." The lights flickered, and in an instant, the figure vanished. But the Thompsons were never the same. The next day, they packed and left the house, but the damage was done. Every night, no matter where they went, they could hear it, the tapping on the windows. They had looked when they were warned not to, and now it would never leave. Outro in narrator's eerie tone. Some rules are there for a reason. The Thompsons thought they could ignore the warnings, but some things don't forgive. So, the next time you hear a tap on your window, just remember, don't look. Story 2. Have you ever felt like someone was watching you, even when you were alone? This is the story of a man who learned that some places are better left undisturbed. So, turn off the lights, settle in, and remember, not every shadow is empty. It started on a cloudy Saturday afternoon. David had gone to a cemetery on the outskirts of town to visit his late grandmother's grave, a ritual he performed every year on her birthday. The air was heavy, and the silence was only broken by the occasional rustle of leaves. David spent a while kneeling by the gravestone, reminiscing about the warmth of his grandmother's hugs. As he placed a small bouquet of lilies on her grave, he noticed something out of the corner of his eye, a figure standing a few rows down. It was a woman dressed in an old-fashioned black dress, her face obscured by a veil. She was standing unervingly still, facing a weathered gravestone. David tried to ignore her, chalking it up to coincidence. But as he walked back to his car, he glanced back. She was gone. The drive home felt off. The radio crackled with static, and he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Pulling into his driveway, David felt relieved to be home, but as he stepped out of the car, a chill ran down his spine. There, at the end of the street, was the woman in the black dress. She was facing his house, completely still. David rushed inside, locking the door behind him. He laughed nervously, convincing himself it was just his imagination. But as the night wore on, things got worse. At around midnight, his dog, Max, started growling at the front door. David peered through the peephole, and his heart dropped. She was standing at the end of his driveway now, still motionless. He backed away, trying to calm himself. He didn't know this woman. Why was she here? And how did she know where he lived? Suddenly, a loud knock echoed through the house. David froze. He hadn't seen her approach the door. Slowly, he crept back to the peephole. This time, there was no one there. But when he turned around, his blood ran cold. There she was, standing at the end of his hallway, veil lifted, revealing a pale, gaunt face with hollow, unblinking eyes. She whispered, "You shouldn't have left me." The next morning, David's neighbors found his front door wide open and Max whimpering on the porch. There was no sign of David, just a single black veil lying in the hallway. Sometimes the dead aren't ready to let go, and sometimes they don't want to be alone. Remember that the next time you visit a graveyard. After all, not everyone leaves when you do. Story 3. Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night, feeling like someone, or something, is watching you? This is the story of a young woman who thought she was alone, until she wasn't. So dim the lights, make sure you're not alone, and prepare yourself for the figure in the corner. It all started on a night that should have been like any other. Emma, a young woman in her mid-20s, was lying in bed scrolling through her phone. The faint glow of the screen illuminated her face as she checked messages and browsed aimlessly. The clock on her nightstand read 2:47 a.m. She sighed, tossing her phone onto the mattress beside her. 3 hours of sleep, if I'm lucky, she muttered. Her small bedroom was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. The curtains were drawn, the door shut, and her favorite blanket was draped over her. Yet, despite the cozy setup, she couldn't shake an odd feeling that had crept over her in the last hour. Turning onto her side, she faced the far corner of the room. It was unusually dark, the shadows pooling there as if the light from her lamp didn't quite reach it. She stared at it for a moment, her sleep-deprived brain imagining shapes within the darkness. For a brief second, it almost looked like something was standing there, a tall, shadowy figure blending into the corner. Emma blinked and squinted, but the corner was empty. She shook her head and laughed softly to herself. "You're losing it, Emma," she whispered, pulling the blanket over her shoulder. The uneasy feeling lingered, though. She closed her eyes, trying to will herself to sleep, but her mind wouldn't let go of the image of the dark corner. Was it just her imagination, or had something been there? Morning came, and the memory of the night faded into the back of her mind. She brushed it off as a trick of her tired eyes and went about her day. Work was busy, filled with emails, phone calls, and the occasional chat with coworkers. By the time Emma got home, she had almost forgotten about the strange moment in her room. That night, as she got ready for bed, the feeling returned. She paused by the light switch, staring at the same corner of the room. In the daylight, it looked perfectly normal, just an empty space by her dresser. But as the sun set and shadows deepened, it seemed different again, like it was waiting for something. Emma took a deep breath and turned off the light. The room plunged into darkness, and her eyes quickly adjusted. The corner was there, as it always had been, but now there was an outline. Something faint but undeniably there. Her heart raced. She grabbed her phone and turned on the flashlight, aiming it at the corner. The beam cut through the dark, revealing nothing. Just an empty wall and a stack of boxes. "Get a grip," she said aloud, her voice shaky. She climbed into bed, pulling the blanket tightly around herself. But sleep didn't come easily. She kept glancing toward the corner, half expecting to see the outline again. She finally drifted off sometime after midnight, only to wake with a start hours later. The clock read 3:33 a.m. The room was silent, but Emma felt like something was off. She lay still, straining to hear any noise. That's when she noticed it. The faintest sound of creaking floorboards, as if someone was walking slowly across the room. Her breath hitched. She didn't dare move, her eyes locked on the ceiling. The sound stopped, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. Emma couldn't take it anymore. She grabbed her phone and turned on the flashlight again. The room was empty. Nothing in the corner, nothing near the bed. Just her, alone. She laughed nervously and said to herself, "You're losing it." But as she lowered her phone, something caught her eye in the mirror across the room. A figure, tall and shadowy, standing right behind her. Emma spun around, her heart hammering in her chest, but there was no one there. The room was empty, just as it had been a moment ago. She backed up against the wall, clutching her phone like a weapon. For the rest of the night, she left the lights on and didn't sleep. The next day, she told her best friend Sarah about what had happened. "Sounds like sleep paralysis," Sarah said, sipping her coffee. "You're stressed, Emma. That's all this is." "It wasn't sleep paralysis," Emma insisted. "I was awake. I saw it in the mirror." Sarah hesitated, her expression serious. "Have you done anything weird lately? Like moved something you shouldn't have or bought something secondhand?" Emma frowned. "What are you talking about?" "Sometimes," Sarah said, lowering her voice, "things can attach themselves to people. You might have picked up something bad." Emma laughed it off, but Sarah's words stayed with her. That night, she set up her phone to record while she slept. She wanted proof. Proof that whatever was happening wasn't just in her head. The recording started with Emma lying in bed, tossing and turning before finally settling into a restless sleep. For hours, nothing happened. Then, at 3:14 a.m., the shadows in the corner began to shift. The figure appeared again, emerging slowly from the darkness. It didn't move at first, just stood there, watching. Then it began to inch closer to the bed. The next morning, Emma woke to find her phone lying on the floor. She picked it up and replayed the footage. Her hands trembled as she watched the figure move closer and closer, standing right beside her bed before vanishing. She dropped the phone, her breath coming in shallow gasps. A loud knock came from the closet. Emma froze. The knock came again, louder this time. She grabbed a flashlight and approached the closet door, her heart pounding in her chest. She flung it open, expecting to find something. But it was empty. She turned around, and that's when she saw it. The figure was standing in the corner, its head tilted unnaturally to the side. Its body was tall and impossibly thin, its face obscured by shadows. "You've seen me," it whispered in a low, guttural voice. Emma screamed and stumbled backward, the flashlight flickering in her hand. The figure didn't move, but its presence was suffocating. "What do you want?" she shouted. It tilted its head further and whispered, "You." The lights in the room flickered and went out. The next morning, Emma's friend Sarah arrived after not hearing from her. She called out, but there was no answer. In Emma's bedroom, the phone lay on the floor, still recording. Sarah picked it up and watched the footage. The last thing it showed was Emma being dragged into the corner by unseen hands, her screams cutting off abruptly. Sarah dropped the phone, backing away in horror. In the mirror behind her, the figure stood, watching. Some corners hide more than shadows, and once you see what's lurking there, it sees you too. So if you ever feel like something's watching you in the dark, just remember, some things are better left unseen.